billionaire's family was outraged when he left his entire fortune to his maid's young son. The mandatory inheritance DNA test revealed why. The boy was his only grandchild, born to the daughter he'd lost in a custody battle decades ago. His maid was actually his long-lost daughter, working unrecognized in his home for years. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The mahogany doors of the Harrison mansion swung shut behind the last lawyer, leaving a silence thick with disbelief and simmering resentment. Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass windows, cast long, accusing shadows across the opulent room. Eleanor Harrison, Arthur's widow, a woman whose face was a mask of icy fury, let out a brittle laugh that echoed unervingly in the cavernous space. His entire fortune? To a maid's boy. Her voice dripped with disdain. Her son, Richard, equally enraged, slammed a fist on the antique table, rattling the crystal decanter. It's preposterous. We're the Harrisons. We deserve that inheritance. It's rightfully ours. Their outrage hung heavy in the air, a palpable force that pressed against Miguel, the young boy sitting quietly in a corner, clutching a worn teddy bear. He didn't understand the torrent of accusations, the venomous whispers, the furious glares directed at his gentle, quiet mother, Maria, who stood with an almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and quiet defiance. The scent of old money and simmering anger choked the air. A single tear traced a path down Maria's cheek, unnoticed in the maelstrom of family fury. She looked at Miguel, her gaze softening, a fierce protectiveness radiating from her. He was the sun in her otherwise bleak existence, the one thing she'd fought tooth and nail to protect. Now that protection felt threatened, jeopardized by a will that had rewritten their lives in a stroke of shocking revelation. The fragile peace of their small, rented apartment seemed a distant, fading memory, replaced by the suffocating opulence and bitter hostility of the Harrison mansion. The weight of the impending legal battle pressed down on her, heavy and inescapable. Yet, within that fear, a tiny spark of hope flickered, a hope born of a secret she'd guarded for years, a secret that now threatened to shatter their fragile world, but also, perhaps, to finally bring them into the light. The lawyer's words hung in the air, a chilling echo in the opulent silence. The DNA test is conclusive. Mr. Harrison's will is valid. The heavy scent of lilies, usually a comforting aroma in the mansion, now felt suffocating. Eleanor Harrison's controlled fury cracked, a shard of ice shattering on the polished floor. This is an outrage, a blatant mockery of justice. Richard's face was a mask of furious disbelief, his hands clenching into fists. Miguel, small and lost amidst the towering figures, clutched his teddy bear tighter, his wide eyes mirroring the chaos surrounding him. Maria, however, remained remarkably still. Her gaze, usually soft and gentle, was now steely. The tear that had traced a path down her cheek moments before had hardened into a resolve, a quiet dignity that defied the storm raging around her. The mahogany table seemed to amplify the silence between the accusations, the unspoken history humming beneath the surface. This boy, Eleanor spat, her voice laced with venom, is not a Harrison. Maria finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper but carrying an unexpected strength. He is Arthur's grandson. The words hung in the air, a simple statement that echoed with the weight of decades of secrets and sacrifices. The subtle scent of lavender from her worn cardigan contrasted sharply with the heavy perfume of the Harrison women. She looked directly at Eleanor, her eyes unwavering. And he is my son. A hush fell over the room, punctuated only by the rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hallway, each second a heavy hammer blow against the fragile peace. Miguel, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, squeezed his bear tighter. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tension, the palpable shift from anger to stunned silence, a silence heavy with the weight of a truth revealed. The opulent room, with its crystal chandeliers and priceless paintings, felt suddenly cold, the shadows lengthening, hinting at the long, arduous battle that lay ahead. The simmering resentment was undeniable, a volatile mixture waiting for the next spark to ignite. The lawyer, Mr. Finch, a man whose tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the weariness etched onto his face, cleared his throat. The heavy silence in the Harrisons' mahogany-paneled study pressed down, thick and suffocating as the scent of lilies. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within. Miguel, nestled beside Maria, squeezed her hand. His small fingers, surprisingly strong, sent a jolt of comfort through her. His wide, innocent eyes, usually bright with mischief, were clouded with a confusion he couldn't articulate. He didn't understand the venomous whispers, the icy glares directed at his mother, but he felt the fear, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Eleanor Harrison, her face a mask of barely controlled rage, broke the silence. This is a farce," she hissed, her voice brittle with fury. The delicate crystal of her perfume bottle trembled in her hand, a fragile echo of her composure. "We'll fight this. We'll expose this charade." Richard, her husband, a man whose success had hardened him into a pillar of granite, merely nodded, his jaw clenched tight. His silence was more terrifying than his wife's outburst, a chilling testament to the resolve simmering beneath his stoic exterior. The air crackled with unshed tears and unspoken accusations. Maria, however, remained steadfast. The quiet dignity that had surprised even herself earlier held firm. She met Eleanor's gaze, her own eyes mirroring the storm, yet filled with a quiet strength that belied her humble appearance. The faint scent of lavender from her worn cardigan offered a fragile counterpoint to the opulent room's overpowering fragrance. "This is not a charade, Mrs. Harrison," Maria said, her voice low but unwavering. "This is my son, and he is Arthur Harrison's grandson." The simple statement hung in the air, a profound declaration that sliced through the opulent facade, revealing the raw, emotional core of the conflict. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, each second a hammer blow against the precarious peace. The battle lines were drawn, the first shot fired in a war far older than the will itself. The weight of decades of secrets, lies, and unspoken pain hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension that promised a long and bitter fight. The weight of Eleanor Harrison's accusation hung heavy in the air, a tangible thing. Sunlight, slanting through the tall windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the oppressive silence. Miguel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, burrowed closer to Maria, his small hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Her fingers, roughened by years of scrubbing floors and washing dishes, felt oddly comforting against his soft skin. The lavender scent of her cardigan, a faint whisper against the lily's overpowering perfume, was a small island of calm in the brewing storm. Richard Harrison, his granite face impassive, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. This changes everything," he conceded, the words tight with reluctant acceptance. The glacial calm in his tone, however, betrayed a simmering unease. He looked at Maria, his gaze lingering for a moment, betraying a flicker of something akin to recognition. Maria met his gaze unflinchingly. Fear still gnawed at her, a cold serpent coiling in her belly, but a new strength, born of necessity and maternal love, had begun to blossom. Decades of suppressed emotions, of quiet endurance, now fueled her resolve. "It changes nothing for Miguel," she declared, her voice low but firm, the tremor barely audible. "He deserves his grandfather's legacy, just as much as anyone else." The unspoken accusations flew between them, the years of silent servitude, the hidden pain, the cruel irony of finding solace in the very house where she'd endured such hardship. The scent of old wood and polished mahogany, usually a symbol of wealth and comfort, suddenly felt suffocating, a reminder of the gulf that separated her from this family, a chasm carved by decades of resentment and unspoken wounds. A slow, agonizing silence followed, broken only by the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow against the fragile peace. The lilies, once elegant symbols of wealth, now seemed to mock her with their delicate beauty, a stark contrast to the raw emotions that filled the room. Eleanor, momentarily silenced, watched Maria with a mixture of suspicion and dawning disbelief, her icy demeanor cracking ever so slightly. The storm within the Harrison family raged on, but in the quiet strength of Maria's gaze, a new dawn seemed to be breaking. A fight was inevitable, but for the first time, Maria wasn't fighting alone. She had Miguel and a quiet, unyielding belief in the truth. The hushed opulence of the Harrison mansion felt stifling. Sunlight, filtering through the stained glass windows, cast kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished mahogany floors, yet the atmosphere remained frigid. Maria, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, felt the tremor in her fingers. The scent of lilies, so meticulously arranged, couldn't mask the underlying tension, a tangible thing that vibrated in the very air. Miguel, sensing her apprehension, squeezed her hand. His small fingers, surprisingly strong, were a grounding force amidst the swirling uncertainty. This is preposterous," Eleanor Harrison hissed, her voice a brittle ice shard. Her gaze, sharp and accusatory, darted between Maria and the lawyer holding the DNA results. The crisp linen of her blouse seemed to amplify the rigid lines of her posture. Richard Harrison, his face a mask of controlled fury, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the document. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall. It was a relentless, accusatory rhythm against the fragile hope blooming in Maria's heart. Maria's breath hitched. Fear, a cold, familiar companion, threatened to overwhelm her, but she met Eleanor's gaze unflinchingly. Decades of silent servitude, of swallowing her pride and her pain, had steeled her. This was about Miguel, about protecting him, and for the first time, a fierce protective instinct overwhelmed her fear. "The test results are conclusive," the lawyer stated calmly, his voice a soothing balm in the storm. "The boy is Mr. Harrison's grandson." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of revelation. Miguel, oblivious to the adult's simmering emotions, looked from one face to another, his wide eyes reflecting the confusion and apprehension swirling around him. He shifted uneasily, clutching Maria's hand tighter, his small body a beacon of innocence in the tempest. He whispered, his voice barely audible, "What's happening, Mama?" Maria bent, her lips brushing against his soft hair. The scent of lavender from her cardigan wrapped around him, a comforting shield against the harsh reality of his suddenly altered life. "Everything will be all right, mi amor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The quiet strength in her voice, however, was a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The truth, stark and undeniable, had changed everything. Yet, in the face of this overwhelming reality, a quiet determination took root. The fight for Miguel's future had begun. The lawyer's words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Sunlight, a cruel mockery of the storm brewing within the Harrison mansion, glinted off Eleanor's diamond earrings. Richard, his face a granite mask of barely controlled rage, finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a fraud, a blatant, calculated lie." His gaze, sharp as flint, settled on Maria, pinning her to the opulent sofa. Miguel, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, burrowed deeper into Maria's embrace. His small hand, gripping hers with surprising strength, was a silent testament to his unwavering trust. Maria, her heart hammering against her ribs, met Richard's gaze with quiet defiance. Years of swallowed pride and hidden pain fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about Miguel's future, his right to a life free from their scorn. "There is no fraud, Mr. Harrison," the lawyer said, his voice firm but measured. "The DNA evidence is irrefutable." He pushed a folder across the polished mahogany table, the leather snapping sharply. The sound, in the suffocating silence, echoed the tension in the room. A low sob escaped Eleanor's lips, a sound that was both bitter and laced with a dawning realization. The carefully constructed facade of the Harrison family, usually so impenetrable, was cracking. The weight of the revelation was starting to break through their entrenched greed and entitlement. The rigid lines of Eleanor's posture softened slightly, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. Maria's gaze flickered to Miguel. His face was a mask of bewilderment, his wide eyes reflecting the tempest raging around him. His quiet whimper tugged at her heartstrings, a visceral reminder of the stakes. She stroked his hair, whispering words of comfort in Spanish, the soft syllables a fragile shield against the harsh reality that threatened to engulf them both. The scent of lavender from her cardigan mingled with the lilies, creating a strange, unsettling bouquet. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful counterpoint to the silent battle waged within the Harrison mansion. The future, once a clear and predictable path for Miguel, was now shrouded in uncertainty, a turbulent sea of legal battles and family discord. But within Maria's heart, a fragile ember of hope remained, burning bright against the encroaching darkness. The fight had only just begun. The lawyer's words hung heavy, a shroud draped over the opulent Harrison drawing room. Sunlight, cruel and mocking, sliced through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, frantic spirits. Eleanor's diamond earrings, usually symbols of her unwavering confidence, now seemed to tremble slightly. Richard, his face a mask of barely controlled fury, finally broke the silence. "This is a fraud," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. His gaze, sharp and cold, fixed on Maria, pinning her to the plush velvet sofa. Miguel, sensing the shift, burrowed deeper into Maria's embrace, his small hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Maria, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, met Richard's gaze with unwavering defiance. Years of swallowed pride, of hidden pain, fueled her resolve. This wasn't about money. It was about Miguel, his future, his right to a life free from their scorn. The scent of lavender from her worn cardigan clashed oddly with the heavy perfume of lilies arranged in a crystal vase. "The DNA evidence is irrefutable, Mr. Harrison," the lawyer stated, his voice firm, measured, a counterpoint to the rising tension. He slid a folder across the mahogany table, the leather snapping sharply, the sound echoing the turmoil in the room. A low sob escaped Eleanor's lips, a sound both bitter and tinged with dawning comprehension. The Harrison family's carefully constructed facade, usually impenetrable, was showing cracks. The weight of the revelation was beginning to chip away at their greed, their entitlement. The rigid lines of Eleanor's posture softened, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. Maria's gaze flickered to Miguel. His wide eyes, reflecting the storm around him, mirrored his bewilderment. A quiet whimper escaped his lips, a heartbreaking sound that tugged at her heart. She stroked his hair, whispering soothing words in Spanish, the soft syllables a fragile shield against the encroaching reality. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful counterpoint to the silent battle raging within. Miguel's future, once clear and certain, was now a turbulent sea of legal battles and family discord. Yet, within Maria's heart, a tiny ember of hope flickered, defiant against the encroaching darkness. The fight, she knew, had only just begun. The lawyer's file, a tangible representation of their fight, lay heavy on the polished table, a silent promise of the battles to come. The lawyer's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sunlight, a cruel spotlight, exposed the dust motes dancing in the opulent Harrison drawing room. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand trembled, betraying the carefully constructed composure of a lifetime. Richard's jaw was tight, a storm brewing behind his icy gaze. This can't be true," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock. The scent of lilies, usually a symbol of wealth and perfection, felt cloying, oppressive. Maria, clutching Miguel tighter, felt the tremor in her own hands. Miguel's small body stiffened against her, his breathing shallow and rapid. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift in the air, the sudden chill that replaced the room's usual suffocating warmth. "The DNA evidence is conclusive," the lawyer reiterated, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the rising tide of panic. He pushed a photograph across the table, a faded image of a young Arthur, his arm around a laughing, younger Maria. The resemblance was undeniable. A gasp escaped Eleanor's lips. Maria's gaze met Richard's. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a flicker of something else. Confusion, perhaps, or even regret. The weight of decades, of unspoken resentments and hidden truths, hung heavy between them. The years melted away, revealing a raw vulnerability beneath the polished surface of their carefully constructed lives. Miguel, sensing the shift in the dynamics, squeezed Maria's hand. Her thumb rubbed circles on his back, a silent reassurance against the storm brewing. The lavender scent of her worn cardigan was a small comfort in the chaos. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful symphony mirroring the turmoil within the room. The opulent surroundings felt suddenly hollow, inadequate against the raw emotion that filled the space. The fight had begun, but the true battle for acceptance, for understanding, for a future that felt both terrifying and hopeful, was only just beginning. The lawyer's words hung in the air, a chilling counterpoint to the room's opulent warmth. Sunlight, slicing through the tall windows, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the golden rays, each a tiny, shimmering testament to the passage of time. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted composure cracked. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a stark contrast to the carefully applied makeup. Richard, his face a mask of controlled fury, clenched his jaw so hard his knuckles shone white. This is impossible," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. The lilies, usually a symbol of wealth and perfection, now felt suffocating, their sweet scent cloying in the suddenly heavy air. Maria, her hand instinctively tightening around Miguel's small one, felt a tremor run through her. Miguel, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, burrowed against her, his breath hitching. He didn't understand the words, but the fear radiating from the adults was palpable, a cold wave washing over him. The lawyer, unmoved by the family's turmoil, pushed a faded photograph across the polished mahogany table. A young Arthur, his arm slung casually around a laughing, younger Maria. The resemblance was uncanny, a visual echo across the decades. A collective gasp escaped the Harrisons, a sound both shocked and horrified. Maria's eyes locked with Richard's, a flicker of something akin to recognition, something beyond the usual cold calculation, flashed in his eyes, a ghost of a past he'd tried to bury. The years dissolved, revealing a raw vulnerability beneath the meticulously crafted facade of their lives. "The DNA results are irrefutable," the lawyer stated, his voice calm but unwavering, a stark contrast to the emotional tempest gathering in the room. The weight of unspoken resentments and hidden truths pressed down, thick and suffocating. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock, each second a hammer blow against their fragile composure. Miguel, sensing the gravity of the moment, squeezed Maria's hand tighter, burying his face in her worn cardigan, the faint scent of lavender a meager comfort in the swirling chaos. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge, mirroring the turmoil within. The opulence of the setting felt brittle, inadequate against the raw emotion laid bare. The fight had begun. The true battle, for acceptance, for understanding, for a future both terrifying and hopeful, had only just begun. The lawyer's words hung heavy, a lead weight in the opulent silence. Sunlight, fractured by the leaded glass windows, cast long, dramatic shadows across the mahogany table, highlighting the tremor in Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand. The scent of lilies, usually a symbol of Harrison wealth, now felt cloying, a suffocating sweetness. Richard's jaw was a granite cliff, his eyes, usually cold and calculating, flickered with something akin to fear. "Impossible," Eleanor breathed, the word catching in her throat. Her voice, usually crisp and commanding, was a fragile whisper. The carefully constructed facade of the Harrison family, a monument to wealth and privilege, was crumbling before Maria's quiet dignity and Miguel's wide, frightened eyes. Maria, her hand a protective cage around Miguel's small, trembling form, felt a deep well of fear bloom in her chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about her son, about the life they had painstakingly built. The lavender scent of her worn cardigan, a familiar comfort, did little to soothe the icy dread that gripped her. Miguel, sensing the upheaval, burrowed deeper into her embrace, his breath hitching in his throat. He didn't understand the complex web of lies and betrayals unfolding, but the terror radiating from the adults was a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket. He squeezed Maria's hand, his small fingers clutching hers with surprising strength. The lawyer, imperturbable, slid a faded photograph across the polished surface. Young Arthur, his arm draped casually around a laughing Maria, their youthful exuberance a stark contrast to the icy tension filling the room. The resemblance was undeniable, a silent accusation echoing across the decades. A collective gasp, a sound both shocked and horrified, rippled through the Harrison family. The carefully crafted masks of indifference shattered, revealing a raw vulnerability beneath the years of carefully constructed privilege. The silence that followed was a chasm, broken only by the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock, each second a hammer blow against their fragile composure. The opulence of the room felt brittle, inadequate against the raw emotion laid bare. The true battle for acceptance and understanding, had begun. The DNA results, stark and undeniable, were projected onto the screen, a cold, clinical confirmation of what everyone, deep down, already suspected. Miguel, perched on a plush armchair far too large for his small frame, stared at the swirling patterns, his eyes wide with a dawning understanding he couldn't quite grasp. The hushed whispers of the assembled Harrison family were a low, unsettling hum in the background. Maria, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder, felt a tremor run through her. The scent of lilies, so pervasive in this opulent room, suddenly felt suffocating. "Impossible," Eleanor Harrison hissed, her voice tight with disbelief. "He deserves his inheritance," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "It's not just money, it's his birthright." Harding's smile tightened. "Mrs. Hernandez, your circumstances are precarious. A prolonged legal battle could be costly, both financially and emotionally. Consider the implications." He watched her closely, gauging her reaction. The air crackled with tension, the scent of expensive perfume now battling with the faint, metallic tang of Maria's fear. "My son's happiness is worth more than any amount of money," Maria said, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. She met Harding's gaze, her eyes blazing with quiet defiance. She would not trade her son's peace for fleeting security. The battle lines were drawn, and Maria, armed with love and unwavering determination, stood her ground. The fight for Miguel's legacy was far from over. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of hushed whispers and rustling papers. Miguel, small and pale in his borrowed suit, sat beside Maria, his hand gripping hers. Her knuckles were white, her grip fierce. The air hung heavy with the scent of old wood and anxiety. Harding, Arthur's lawyer, stood before the judge, his voice a practiced monotone, attempting to discredit Maria's testimony. His words, carefully chosen barbs aimed at her character, stung, but Maria met his gaze unflinchingly. She felt Miguel's hand tighten, a silent reassurance. "Your Honor," Harding said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mrs. Hernandez's claim rests entirely on circumstantial evidence. There's no concrete proof of a prior relationship between herself and the deceased." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the suffocating silence. The judge adjusted his spectacles. Maria swallowed, the dryness in her throat a physical manifestation of her fear. The fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the tremor in her hands. She looked at Miguel, his face a mixture of confusion and apprehension mirroring her own internal turmoil. This wasn't just about money. It was about her son's identity, about the truth she had guarded for so long. Taking a deep breath, she spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. I have no proof that would satisfy a court of law, Mr. Harding. But I have memories. Memories of a young man, fiery and passionate, and a love that burned brightly, even in the face of heartbreak. She closed her eyes, conjuring images of a past stolen from her. Images so sharp and painful they felt like a physical wound. A love that resulted in a child. My child, Miguel. The courtroom was silent. Every eye fixed on her. Her words, simple yet powerful, hung in the air. The judge's expression was unreadable, yet a flicker of something akin to empathy crossed Harding's face. A fleeting crack in his polished facade. He knew the truth, or at least a part of it, a fact that subtly shifted the power dynamic in the courtroom. The fight, however, was far from over. The weight of the past, and the battle for Miguel's future, pressed down upon them all. The next few days would determine not only the ownership of a fortune, but the very definition of family. The following days were a blur of legal maneuvering and hushed conversations. Maria, exhausted but resolute, found herself the center of a whirlwind. Harding, Arthur's lawyer, a man whose tailored suits seemed to conceal a chilling pragmatism, sought her out in the sterile waiting room of the courthouse. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken threats. "Mrs. Hernandez," he began, his voice a low purr. "We can make this easier. A substantial settlement, enough to secure Miguel's future, in exchange for a discreet withdrawal from the case." Maria's eyes, usually warm and welcoming, hardened. The faint scent of lavender from her small, worn purse couldn't mask the tension radiating from her. "My son's future isn't for sale, Mr. Harding." Her voice, though quiet, held an unwavering strength that surprised even herself. He leaned closer, the scent of his expensive cologne a stark contrast to Maria's gentle fragrance. "Think of Miguel. The scrutiny, the pressure. This battle could drag on for years. Years of uncertainty, of public dissection of your life." He pressed. "Think of the potential harm to the boy." Miguel, sensing the weight of the conversation, clutched his mother's hand. His eyes, wide and frightened, mirrored the fear Maria fought to conceal. The fluorescent lights hummed a discordant tune, amplifying the tension. Maria's grip on Miguel's hand tightened. She looked at her son, his small face etched with a worry beyond his years. A wave of protectiveness washed over her, erasing any trace of doubt. "My son deserves the truth, Mr. Harding," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "And the truth is, he is Arthur Harrison's grandson." She looked directly at Harding, her gaze unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of any battle for it." Harding's smile faltered. He saw in her eyes not just defiance, but a quiet, unwavering dignity that spoke volumes. He knew then that this wasn't a woman easily intimidated. He straightened, the slight shift in his posture betraying a flicker of grudging respect. The battle lines were drawn, the stakes higher than ever before. The weight of the past, and the fight for Miguel's future, pressed down on them, a suffocating pressure threatening to crush them all. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of whispered anxieties and rustling papers. Miguel, small and pale, sat beside Maria, his hand gripping her so tightly his knuckles shone white. The air hung thick with the scent of old wood polish and simmering resentment. Harding, Arthur's lawyer, a man who seemed sculpted from polished granite, watched them with a predator's gleam in his eyes. He'd underestimated Maria's resolve. Her quiet defiance, a flickering candle against his calculated storm, unnerved him. The judge's gavel fell, silencing the murmuring. The Harrison family, a tableau of simmering outrage and forced composure, glared at Maria. Their tailored suits and expensive jewelry couldn't mask the raw, bitter envy that twisted their faces. Eleanor, Arthur's eldest daughter, her face a mask of icy disdain, leaned towards her brother, a low hiss escaping her lips. "This woman, this maid is going to ruin us." Harding rose, his voice a smooth, oiled blade. "Your Honor, we propose a settlement. A substantial sum, sufficient to ensure young Miguel's future. A comfortable life, far removed from this unpleasantness." He directed a pointed look at Maria, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. Maria's eyes met Harding's, unflinching. The scent of lavender, faint yet persistent, seemed to act as a shield against his calculated pressure. "Mr. Harding," her voice, though soft, carried a quiet strength. "My son's future is not a commodity to be bartered." Miguel squeezed her hand, his silent affirmation a source of unwavering support. The weight of their shared history, a tapestry woven from hardship and quiet love, bound them together. This wasn't just about money. It was about truth, about justice, about their very identity. The judge, a weary man with eyes that had seen countless battles, leaned forward. "Mrs. Hernandez, are you aware of the implications of rejecting this offer? This case could drag on for years." His words, though measured, carried the weight of the legal labyrinth they were navigating. Maria looked at Miguel, her gaze lingering on his earnest, worried face. She saw his quiet strength mirroring her own. She knew, without a doubt, this was their fight, their truth, and they would face it together. "I understand, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady, clear. "But some battles are worth fighting, for my son, for the truth." The courtroom held its breath. The battle lines were drawn, sharper than ever. The fight for Miguel's future had only just begun. The mahogany table in the Harrison family's lawyer's office gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Maria, her worn cotton dress a stark contrast to the polished surroundings, sat rigidly opposite Eleanor Harrison. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Eleanor, her face etched with a bitterness that belied her expensive silk blouse, leaned forward. "You knew," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You knew all along. You deliberately hid it from him, from us all." Maria's hands trembled, but her gaze remained steady. "I had no choice, Eleanor. Protecting Miguel was my only priority. Your father, he made sure of that." The faint scent of lavender, clinging to her, seemed to fill the sterile room with a fragile sense of hope. Protecting him? By stealing his inheritance? By allowing him to grow up in poverty while we suffered the consequences of his cruelty. Eleanor's voice rose, sharp and accusing. The lawyer, a young woman named Sarah, subtly shifted in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Suffered." Maria's voice was barely a whisper, yet it held a quiet strength. "Your father's cruelty was not limited to his family. It broke my heart, it stole my youth, but it never diminished my love for Miguel. He was, and is, the most precious thing in my life." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a testament to years of unspoken pain. Eleanor's face softened, just a fraction. A flicker of something akin to regret crossed her features before hardening once more. "He was a monster. He destroyed our lives." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of decades of resentment. Maria's gaze dropped to her clasped hands. The worn fabric felt familiar, comforting in the face of the family's wrath. "He wasn't a monster, Eleanor. He was a man who made terrible mistakes, a man who carried his regrets to his grave, a man who, in the end, finally found his way to atone." Her voice was a low murmur, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their animosity. The scent of lavender, stronger now, seemed to soften the edges of their anger, a subtle promise of healing. Sarah watched them both, her sharp gaze taking in every nuance of their emotional exchange, a silent observer poised to make her move. The confrontation was far from over, yet a subtle shift had begun. The rigid lines of hatred were beginning to soften, replaced by the fragile contours of understanding. The seeds of reconciliation, long dormant, were finally beginning to sprout. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of hushed whispers and rustling papers. Miguel, perched on the edge of his seat, felt a tremor run through him, a physical manifestation of the anxiety coiling in his stomach. He clutched Maria's hand, her calloused fingers surprisingly strong against his. The scent of her lavender perfume, a constant in his life, was a small comfort in the overwhelming atmosphere. Eleanor Harrison, her usually impeccable composure fractured, glared at Maria from across the room. The expensive silk of her suit couldn't hide the tautness in her shoulders, the tremor in her jaw. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were clouded with a mixture of anger and something else. Regret? This is a farce. Eleanor's voice, sharp and brittle, cut through the quiet. A cruel joke played on my family. Her voice cracked, betraying the carefully constructed facade. The veneer of composure shattered, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. Maria's gaze, steady and unflinching, met Eleanor's. The years of silent servitude, the years of suppressed pain, seemed to gather in her eyes, a storm of emotion threatening to break. "It's not a joke, Eleanor," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's the truth, a truth your father chose to bury, but one that cannot be denied." The lawyer, Sarah, watched them both with keen interest. She had seen the gradual shift in Eleanor's demeanor, the subtle cracks appearing in the wall of anger. She felt the same flicker of hope, the same delicate scent of lavender that had infused the previous meeting. A wave of memories washed over Maria, the memories of a younger, vibrant Elena, full of laughter and dreams. The sharp sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of a life stolen. These memories, once buried deep, were now surfacing, threatening to overwhelm her. She squeezed Miguel's hand tighter, her silent plea for strength mirrored in his eyes. Miguel, witnessing his mother's inner turmoil, felt a surge of protectiveness, a sudden understanding of the sacrifices she had made. The boy's initial confusion and fear had morphed into something deeper, a fierce loyalty and unwavering love for his mother. The judge cleared his throat, bringing the court back to order. But the tension lingered, a palpable entity filling the courtroom. The confrontation was far from over. The seeds of reconciliation had been planted, but they still needed time, nurturing, and perhaps a little bit of luck to blossom. The future remained uncertain, yet a fragile hope, like the scent of lavender, hung in the air, a promise of healing. The courtroom air, thick with tension, crackled with unspoken accusations. Eleanor Harrison's perfectly sculpted facade had crumbled, revealing a raw, wounded woman. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the harsh lines of her expensive suit. The scent of lilies, usually a comforting presence, now felt cloying, a stark contrast to Maria's comforting lavender. "It wasn't a joke," Maria repeated, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, held Eleanor's. Decades of silence, of hidden pain, seemed to pour from her eyes, a torrent of unspoken sorrow. The years of quiet servitude, the stolen dreams, the sacrifices, they all coalesced in that single powerful gaze. Miguel, sensing his mother's vulnerability, squeezed her hand, his small gesture a silent promise of unwavering support. His fear had morphed into a fierce protectiveness, a deep understanding of the sacrifices his mother had endured. He looked at Eleanor, his gaze a mixture of confusion and a nascent empathy. He saw not a villain, but a woman broken by grief and regret. Sarah, the lawyer, observed the scene with keen eyes. The raw emotion in the room was palpable, a tangible energy that thrummed in the air. She saw the flicker of recognition in Eleanor's eyes, a subtle softening of the hard edges that had defined her for so long. The seeds of understanding, planted in the previous meeting, seemed to be slowly taking root. A fragile hope, as delicate as a butterfly's wing, began to flutter in the courtroom. Eleanor's voice, when she spoke again, was barely a whisper. I never knew," she choked out, her words laced with regret. "He never told me about Elena." The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to years of estrangement and suppressed truths. The judge, sensing the shift in the room's energy, adjourned the court for the day. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Maria and Miguel walked hand in hand, the silence between them filled with the unspoken understanding that had blossomed in the heart of the legal battle. The fight was far from over, but the first crack in the wall of bitterness had appeared, a tiny fissure filled with the fragile promise of healing and reconciliation. The mahogany table in the Harrison family's opulent study felt cold beneath Maria's trembling hands. The scent of old leather and expensive cigars hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the lavender she usually wore. Eleanor Harrison, her face etched with a mixture of anger and dawning comprehension, sat opposite her. The others, a muted backdrop of simmering resentment, watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "You knew," Eleanor finally said, her voice low, a tremor running through it. The words weren't an accusation, but a heartbroken statement. Maria's gaze, locked on Eleanor's, held a lifetime of unspoken pain. "I knew," Maria confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew he was my father and Miguel. Miguel is his grandson." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The years of quiet suffering, the sacrifices, the unwavering love for Miguel, it all poured out in the silent strength of her gaze. "But why?" Richard, Eleanor's brother, his voice rough with disbelief and a hint of something akin to remorse, broke the silence. His usually impeccably groomed appearance was disheveled, his usual arrogance replaced by a vulnerable confusion. Maria hesitated. How could she explain the tangled web of desperation, the crushing poverty, the fear of exposing Miguel to the harsh realities of the world they inhabited? The love she bore for Arthur, twisted and complicated as it was, the love that had driven her to accept years of anonymity in his home. She found her words, each one heavy with years of silent endurance. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "And I had to protect him." A heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The opulent setting, usually a source of pride, now felt suffocating, a reminder of the vast chasm that separated Maria from this family. The scent of lilies, Eleanor's favorite, seemed to mock the lavender Maria clung to, a quiet symbol of her resilience and enduring spirit. The air crackled with unspoken truths, decades of resentment and secrets finally spilling into the open. The confrontation had begun, and the path to reconciliation, if it existed at all, lay somewhere within the raw emotion filling the room. The grandfather clock's chime, a mournful toll, punctuated the silence. Miguel, perched on a plush velvet armchair far too grand for his usual worn couch, felt the weight of the room press down on him. He was 11, suddenly thrust into a world of mahogany and hushed whispers, a world vastly different from the small, sun-drenched apartment he shared with Maria. He watched his grandmother, his real grandmother, her face etched with the lines of hardship, the strength of survival. "So, he was my grandfather?" he finally whispered, his voice barely audible above the tick-tock of the clock. The question hung in the air, a fragile bridge between the past and the present. Eleanor, her eyes red-rimmed, nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Yes, Miguel, your grandfather, Arthur Harrison." The name felt foreign on her tongue, stripped of its usual weight of authority, tainted with regret. Richard, still grappling with the revelation, ran a hand through his thinning hair. He never told us," he mumbled, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and shame. The anger was receding, replaced by a dawning comprehension of his father's complex, hidden life. The room, previously charged with hostility, began to shift, the air thick with unspoken apologies. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, bringing with it the scent of rain and damp earth, a stark contrast to the opulent interior. The scent, earthy and clean, reminded Miguel of the park near their apartment, of carefree days spent kicking leaves. A wistful smile touched his lips, a small memory in the midst of a vast, confusing reality. He looked at Maria, her hand resting protectively over his, and he saw not just a maid, but a mother, a woman of quiet strength, and for the first time, he understood the depths of her sacrifice. The weight of his new reality, the inheritance, the sudden elevation in status, felt insignificant in the face of that enduring love. The opulent study, filled with the echoes of a bitter past, was slowly beginning to feel less like a prison and more like a place where healing might begin. The mahogany table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the lawyer's office, reflecting the strained faces gathered around it. Maria, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, felt the cool fabric of her simple dress against her skin, a stark contrast to the luxurious leather chairs surrounding her. Richard Harrison, his face pale and drawn, shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his past actions heavy upon him. His sister, Eleanor, her eyes still red-rimmed from recent tears, offered Maria a small, hesitant smile, felt fragile, like a butterfly's wing. We understand now," Richard began, his voice a low rumble. The words felt awkward, clumsy attempts at bridging the chasm of years of resentment. "About Elena, about you." His gaze lingered on Maria, searching for understanding, for forgiveness. Eleanor nodded, adding softly, "The will. It was right." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken weight of their past greed. They had fought, clawed, and schemed, only to discover the truth lay in the quiet dignity of the woman they had dismissed as mere help. Maria, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands, swallowed hard. The years of quiet suffering, the sacrifices made for Miguel, felt suddenly lighter. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the turmoil of a life lived in the shadows. "I only wanted to protect him," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. "I never wanted anything more." A sharp intake of breath from Richard punctuated the silence. He looked at Eleanor, a shared understanding passing between them. The anger, the bitterness, had begun to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of shame. They had judged her based on appearances, on her position, never seeing the strength of spirit that bloomed beneath her quiet demeanor. The scent of old leather and polished wood suddenly felt heavy, suffocating, a reminder of their own failings. The lawyer, a seasoned observer of human emotion, cleared his throat, breaking the tension. He shuffled some papers, a subtle gesture meant to ease the atmosphere. "There are still legal matters to address," he said gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "But the fundamental issue, Miguel's inheritance, is settled." He paused, observing their reactions. The weight of their conflict, once so overwhelming, felt markedly diminished. A new, uncertain hope filled the room. The path ahead remained unclear, but it was a path they would now walk together. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Miguel's small, sparsely furnished room. Dust motes danced in the golden light, illuminating the worn teddy bear clutched in his hands. He was 12, but the weight of recent events pressed down on him like a physical burden. He hadn't understood the full extent of the legal battle, the accusations hurled at his mother, but he sensed the underlying animosity. The whispers, the sideways glances, the hushed tones of adults. They all spoke of a world turned upside down. Maria entered, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. The scent of lavender, her constant companion, filled the air. She sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. The touch was familiar, a source of comfort in this chaotic maelstrom. They don't understand me, Joe," she said, her voice barely a breath, laced with a deep weariness. Her eyes, usually bright with a quiet strength, were clouded with sadness. Miguel looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "They're mean, Mama." The simple statement held the weight of a child's profound understanding of injustice. "Yes, Mijo, some people are," she replied, her voice softening. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind his ear, her touch lingering. "But their anger doesn't change who we are, or the truth of our story." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your grandfather, he loved you, even if he didn't know it." Miguel's brow furrowed. The image of the stern, distant man in the old photographs conflicted with his mother's words. He felt a confusing mix of emotions: grief for a grandfather he never knew, resentment toward those who questioned his right to his inheritance, and a burgeoning sense of pride in his mother's quiet resilience. "It's not just about the money, Miguel," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's about family, about proving that love can conquer even the worst storms." She squeezed his shoulder, her eyes reflecting the unwavering love that had sustained them through years of hardship. "We'll face them together. We always have." The setting sun painted the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, mirroring the complex emotions swirling within Miguel. He looked at his mother, her face etched with both exhaustion and determination. He saw a strength he had always known, but now understood with a newfound depth. He squeezed her hand back, a silent promise of support amidst the storm. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, strengthened by the bond he shared with his mother. A bond forged in adversity, and now tempered by the unexpected truth of his heritage. The sterile courtroom air hung heavy with unspoken accusations. Miguel, perched between Maria and his lawyer, felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, a silent judgment weighing on his small shoulders. The hushed whispers of the courtroom felt like a physical pressure against his ears. The scent of old wood and polished brass mingled with the faint perfume Maria always wore, a comforting lavender against the antiseptic sterility. His gaze drifted to the Harrison family, seated across the room, their faces a tableau of simmering resentment and begrudging curiosity. Their tailored suits and expensive jewelry felt like a stark contrast to his own worn jeans and simple shirt, a visual representation of the chasm that separated them. He saw a flicker of something resembling regret in the eyes of one of Arthur's older sons, but it was quickly masked by a return to their usual cold demeanor. "It's not about the money, Mijo," Maria had whispered, her hand squeezing his reassuringly before the proceedings began. The memory of her words, her unwavering faith, pulsed through him, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of legal proceedings. Mr. Harding, the family lawyer, their hard-lined faces betrayed a simmering fury, launched into a scathing cross-examination. His words like carefully aimed darts. He challenged the DNA evidence, questioning the integrity of the testing process, his voice dripping with disdain. Maria remained composed, her responses measured and calm, yet a quiver in her voice betrayed the emotional toll it was taking. The judge, impassive behind his wooden bench, seemed untouched by the escalating tension, his face betraying no emotion. Miguel watched, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He saw his mother's quiet dignity, her steadfast refusal to be intimidated. It was a reflection of the strength he'd always witnessed in her, the strength that had raised him alone, a strength now facing an onslaught of legal maneuvering and callous disregard. The courtroom, once a cold, impersonal space, now felt like a battleground. He understood then, with a clarity that surprised him, the stakes were far higher than a mere inheritance. This battle was about respect, about validation, about the recognition of a family bond forged in adversity, and now threatened by the machinations of those who held onto wealth and privilege as a shield against compassion. The afternoon light, streaming through the high windows, cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the stark contrasts in the lives of these two families, lives that were irrevocably intertwined by a legacy both cruel and redemptive. The weight of it all bore down on his young shoulders, but in his mother's hand, clasped tightly in his, he felt the unwavering strength of their bond. A bond that would, he knew, see them through the storm. The musty scent of old paper and leather filled the air in Arthur's study. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the gloom, illuminating faded photographs lining the walls. One, tucked away in a shadowed corner, caught Miguel's eye. A younger Arthur, his face etched with a raw, vulnerable sorrow, cradled a baby girl. Elena, the name echoed softly in Miguel's mind, a whispered secret revealed. Maria stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, a silent comfort in the face of this unearthed past. "He loved her," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, a tremor betraying her own buried emotions. The weight of unspoken years pressed down on them both. The photographs weren't just images. They were fragments of a shattered life, piecing together the puzzle of Arthur's past. A legal document, yellowed with age, detailed the brutal custody battle, the heartless judge's decision, the finality of Arthur's loss. Miguel felt a sharp pang of empathy for the man he only knew as a cold, distant figure in his will. He was suddenly confronted with the devastating consequences of Arthur's choices. He saw the pain reflected in the haunted eyes of his younger self in the photo. It wasn't just Maria who suffered. Arthur carried the weight of his loss for decades. He had lost a daughter, a love, and a chance to be a father. A chilling realization washed over Miguel. His inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about a fractured family attempting to reconcile with a painful, long-hidden past. Maria's hand tightened on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the shared weight of their discovery. The silence in the study felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and unlived years. A new understanding, a new empathy, began to bloom between them, forging their bond stronger than ever. The mahogany table in the lawyer's office felt cold beneath Miguel's fingertips. He traced the grain, the polished surface, a stark contrast to the rough texture of his worn jeans. Across from him, Mr. Davies, Arthur's lawyer, steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. The scent of expensive leather and old coffee hung heavy in the air. The documents, the custody battle, Miguel began, his voice husky. It wasn't just a legal fight, was it? Davies leaned forward, his gaze intense. Arthur fought tooth and nail for Elena. He lost everything. His reputation, his peace of mind, even his chance at happiness. He paused, a sigh escaping his lips. He was a broken man, Miguel. He never truly recovered. Maria's hand found his, a silent reassurance. The weight of Arthur's sorrow, his hidden grief, settled heavily on them both. They'd seen the pain etched in the faded photographs, but Davies' words added a chilling depth. He tried to find her. Davies continued, his voice low. He hired investigators, followed leads, but Elena vanished. He believed she was dead. He produced a small, worn photograph, a younger Elena, her smile bright and carefree, cradling a baby Miguel. Maria gasped, a soft sob escaping her lips. She clutched the photograph, her fingers trembling. The image was a ghost of a memory, a life she'd buried deep within. Years of silent longing, of unwavering love, surfaced in a wave of bittersweet emotion. The years of working for Arthur, the quiet sacrifices, the silent hope, it all clicked into place. She had unknowingly sought refuge under the roof of the man who had caused her pain. He never knew, she whispered, her voice cracking. He never knew, Davies echoed, his gaze meeting hers with a newfound understanding. The heavy weight of secrets, years of lies and misunderstandings began to lift, replaced with the tentative beginnings of truth and reconciliation. The air in the room felt less suffocating, the scent of old coffee replaced with the faintest hint of hope. The legal battle wasn't just about money anymore. It was about healing the wounds of a broken family. The lawyer's office, once a sterile space of legal maneuvering, now felt charged with a raw, unspoken emotion. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, mirroring the turmoil in Maria's heart. She clutched the photograph, a tangible link to a past she'd tried to bury. Miguel, sensing her distress, gently squeezed her hand. So, he never knew? Miguel's voice was barely a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the air. Davies nodded, the weight of years settling on his shoulders. He left everything to you, Miguel, because in his heart he always knew. The will was his final, desperate attempt at reconciliation. A silent apology etched in ink. A sob escaped Maria's lips, a sound both of grief and relief. Decades of unspoken longing, of sacrifice and silent hope, culminated in this single, shattering moment of truth. The years spent under Arthur's roof, a silent penance, were now reframed, cloaked in the painful irony of a love unrecognized, a daughter hidden in plain sight. The mahogany table, previously a symbol of cold legal proceedings, now felt like a shared altar, a silent testament to a fractured family's hidden bonds. The scent of old coffee faded, replaced by the faint, almost imperceptible scent of lavender from Maria's worn handkerchief. It was a subtle, yet powerful reminder of her enduring spirit, a quiet strength that had carried her through decades of hardship. Miguel looked from Maria to Davies, his young face etched with a profound understanding that belied his years. The weight of his inheritance was nothing compared to the weight of his newfound history, the legacy of a love story lost and found. He saw the reflection of his own strength in his mother's eyes, the resilience born from adversity, the quiet dignity of a woman who had faced life's harshest blows with unwavering grace. He felt the echo of Arthur's regret, his unspoken remorse, a silent apology that transcended the grave. The legal battle, once a fight for money, now felt like a battle for healing, for the recognition of a truth that had been buried for far too long. The faintest glimmer of hope, a fragile but persistent flame, ignited in the cold lawyer's office, promising a new dawn for a family unexpectedly reborn. The old leather-bound ledger lay open on Arthur's mahogany desk, its brittle pages whispering tales of a life lived in shadows. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the window, illuminating faded ink detailing lavish expenditures and cryptic notes scrawled in Arthur's sharp hand. Davies, Arthur's lawyer, traced a finger across a faded entry, a substantial sum wired to a Swiss bank account, dated years before Miguel's birth. He was trying to build a new life for her, Davies murmured, his voice catching. Maria, sitting opposite, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, felt a tremor run through her. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions. Miguel watched them both, his young face a mask of quiet contemplation, the weight of his inheritance almost imperceptible compared to the revelation unfolding before him. The photograph of Elena, young and vibrant, lay next to the ledger, a silent witness to a love story tragically lost. He never stopped loving her, Davies stated, his voice low. The scent of old paper and leather mingled with the faint lavender of Maria's handkerchief. The image of Elena stirred a fresh wave of grief, a painful longing that transcended time and circumstance. The legal battle, the accusations, the public scrutiny, they paled in comparison to this raw, unveiled truth. Maria's eyes, reflecting the muted sunlight, glistened with unshed tears. A single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek, a testament to a lifetime of unspoken sorrow, and finally, a glimmer of understanding. This wasn't just about money. It was about a father's remorse, a daughter's forgiveness, and a son's acceptance of a complex legacy. The room, once a symbol of legal conflict, now felt like a sacred space, a silent testament to a family's long-awaited reunion. The weight of the past, once crushing, began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope for the future. Davies pushed the ledger across the polished mahogany desk, the worn leather cool beneath Maria's trembling fingers. The scent of old paper and dust filled the air, a stark contrast to the vibrant floral perfume she usually wore. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the golden shafts. This shows Arthur's attempts to provide for Elena after the custody battle, Davies explained, his voice low, tinged with a surprising empathy. Regular payments disguised as business transactions. For years, Maria traced a finger over a faded entry, a lump forming in her throat. The numbers blurred through her tears, a lifetime of hardship suddenly recontextualized. Years of silent sacrifice, of scrubbing floors and polishing silver, all while unknowingly being a breath away from her father. The weight of it threatened to crush her, them linked by an unbreakable bond of love and shared experience. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. As they walked, arm in arm, towards a future that was both uncertain and profoundly hopeful, Maria felt a shift within her. It was the beginning of healing, of self-acceptance. The past, though painful, would no longer define her. She had won her battle, and in winning, she had found something far more precious: peace and love, a love that transcended everything. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of hushed whispers and nervous energy. Maria, her hand clasped tightly in Miguel's, felt a tremor run through her. The judge's gavel, a sharp crack in the suffocating silence, announced the verdict. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She'd won, but the victory felt muted, the taste of triumph bittersweet. The years of hardship, The sacrifices, the quiet desperation. They lingered like a phantom pain. Miguel squeezed her hand, his eyes mirroring her complex emotions. He saw the weariness etched on her face, the subtle trembling of her lips. He knew this wasn't just about the money, the inheritance. This was about the validation of a life lived in the shadows, a testament to her unwavering love. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmuring crowd. "It's over," she nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Sí, mi hijo. It's over." The words held the weight of decades, the echo of a battle fought not just in court, but within the confines of her own heart. The Harrison family, once a monument of icy disdain, now sat scattered, a tableau of subdued remorse. Eleanor, Arthur's eldest daughter, her face pale and drawn, caught Maria's eye. A flicker of something akin to understanding, perhaps even apology, briefly crossed her features before she quickly averted her gaze. The animosity hadn't vanished entirely, but its sharp edges were softened, dulled by the weight of the truth. The seed of forgiveness had been sown, though its blossoming would take time. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere within. The city's cacophony faded into a muted hum as Maria and Miguel stepped into the sunlight. Miguel pulled a warm scarf around her shoulders, his touch gentle, reassuring. "We'll have a new beginning, Mama," he murmured, his eyes filled with a promise that transcended words. She smiled, a genuine smile this time, free from the shadows of the past. "Yes, mi hijo, a new beginning." The future stretched before them, vast and uncertain, yet brimming with a quiet, unyielding hope. The victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a victory over fear, a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. The scars remained, a poignant reminder of their journey, but they were scars of survival, etched into a life reborn. The celebratory dinner felt oddly muted. The expensive champagne tasted flat. The caviar lacked its usual zing. Miguel, surrounded by the Harrison family, felt a chasm between himself and their forced smiles. Eleanor, her eyes still haunted, offered him a tentative smile. I'm glad it's over, Miguel," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the clinking silverware. He met her gaze, the weight of their shared history heavy in the air. "Me too, Eleanor," he replied, his tone sincere yet guarded. Maria, seated beside him, watched the interaction with a quiet intensity. The years of servitude, the quiet humiliation, the constant fear, all of it swirled within her. The weight of it was palpable. Yet, there was a quiet strength in her posture, a newfound self-assurance that radiated from her. The crisp linen tablecloth felt cool beneath her hands, a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through her chest, a warmth that stemmed not from the opulent surroundings, but from the quiet triumph in her heart. The scent of roasting lamb filled the air, a comforting aroma that did little to soothe the lingering tension. Richard Harrison, Arthur's brother, cleared his throat. We want to apologize, Maria," he mumbled, his words hesitant, laden with years of unspoken resentment and newly discovered regret. Maria looked at him, her expression unreadable. She raised her glass, the crystal catching the candlelight. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice steady, clear, carrying the quiet dignity of a woman who had endured and emerged victorious. The clinking of glasses, this time, held a genuine resonance, a fragile harmony replacing the discord of the past. The air still held a trace of bitterness, but it was significantly diluted. Hope, like a fragile seedling, had begun to push through the hardened earth of their troubled history. The path ahead remained long and uncertain, yet in that dimly lit room, surrounded by the remnants of a fractured family, a nascent sense of unity began to take root. The days following the court case blurred into a hazy montage of legal paperwork and hushed conversations. Maria, however, found a strange calm settling over her. The opulent Harrison mansion, once a symbol of her quiet desperation, now felt different, less like a gilded cage, more like a temporary resting place. The scent of lilies, Arthur's favorite, no longer evoked sadness, but a bittersweet memory. She sat on the sun-drenched veranda, the warmth soaking into her bones, a stark contrast to the chill that had clung to her for so long. Miguel, meanwhile, navigated his new reality with a quiet grace that surprised even himself. He'd established a foundation dedicated to helping children from disadvantaged backgrounds, a direct response to his own humble upbringing. He visited the foundation regularly, the laughter of the children a balm to his soul. The weight of the Harrison inheritance didn't crush him. It empowered him. One evening, Miguel found Maria in the garden, tending to the roses. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. "Abuela," he said softly, kneeling beside her. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. "Mi niño," she replied, her voice husky with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon. "A life of peace, forgiveness." "It's not over, Abuela," Miguel said, his voice firm. "But we're closer. We're finally free." He reached out, taking her hand in his. Her calloused fingers, testament to years of hard work, felt surprisingly soft against his. A tear traced a path down Maria's cheek. "You are my strength, Miguel. My everything." The words were simple, yet profound, laden with the unspoken weight of their shared journey. He squeezed her hand, the silent acknowledgement of their shared bond stronger than any words could express. The roses, vibrant and alive, mirrored the blossoming hope within their hearts. The past remained, a shadow in the background, but it no longer held the power to define them. They had faced the storm and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, together. The future, though uncertain, held the promise of a new dawn. The initial awkwardness between Maria and Eleanor Harrison, Arthur's eldest daughter, was palpable. Eleanor, perched stiffly on a plush velvet armchair, clutched a teacup, her knuckles white. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent testament to the passage of time and the weight of unspoken resentments. The scent of lilies, a ghostly reminder of Arthur, hung heavy in the air. Maria, however, sat comfortably in a simple wicker chair, her posture radiating a quiet strength. She sipped her tea, the delicate china a stark contrast to her calloused hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice brittle. I didn't expect." She trailed off, her gaze flitting to the garden outside. "I still don't understand." Maria met her gaze, her expression gentle but firm. "I understand your anger, Eleanor, but there's more to the story than you know." A soft sob escaped Eleanor's lips. "More? What more could there possibly be? My father left everything to a boy he barely knew." "He knew more than you think, Eleanor," Maria replied quietly, her voice laced with a weary sadness. "He knew about Miguel. He just couldn't find a way to reconcile his past." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of something resembling empathy crossed her face. The rigid lines around her mouth softened infinitesimally. Outside, a robin chirped, a tiny sound in the vast, echoing room. The afternoon sun warmed Maria's face, a soothing balm on the years of emotional frost. A slow, deliberate shift occurred in the room. The tension, though still present, felt less like a battleground and more like a delicate truce. This was the beginning, a tentative step toward healing. The path ahead was long, but for the first time, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, frantic spirits. Maria, her hand resting lightly on Miguel's, felt a tremor of anxiety. His hand, small in hers, squeezed back, a silent reassurance. She met the gaze of Richard Harding, Arthur's lawyer, his expression unreadable behind his polished spectacles. He'd become an unlikely ally, his initial cynicism eroded by Miguel's quiet dignity and Maria's unwavering strength. "Your Honor," Maria began, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I worked for Mr. Harrison for 20 years. I loved him even though he never knew. My love for him is the reason I stayed silent, the reason I worked so hard, enduring the judgment of those who didn't understand. The reason I kept Miguel from him." A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Miguel, his youthful face etched with a newfound maturity, stood beside her, his hand clasped firmly in hers. He whispered, "It's okay, Mama," offering a small, comforting smile. His presence, a silent testament to their love, echoed through the hushed courtroom. Eleanor Harrison, observing from the front row, watched with a mixture of guilt and awe. The hard lines of her face softened, her initial anger replaced by a dawning understanding. The bitterness that had poisoned her for years began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of profound regret. She had judged Maria harshly, blinded by greed and resentment. But now, seeing Maria's strength and love, she saw the truth. The judge, a kindly older woman with piercing eyes, leaned forward. "Ms. Rodriguez, your testimony is compelling. It speaks volumes about the depth of your character." Her words were a balm to Maria's wounded spirit, a validation of her years of silent sacrifice. The weight of years lifted slightly. The courtroom, once a battleground of legal maneuvers, felt lighter, transformed into a space of profound reconciliation. The scent of lilies, always a reminder of Arthur's coldness, now carried a subtle undertone of forgiveness. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on Maria and Miguel, their faces reflecting a hard-won peace. Their journey, far from over, had reached a critical turning point, one filled with a fragile, precious hope. The judge's gavel fell, a sharp crack echoing the finality of the decision. Maria and Miguel, hand in hand, felt a wave of relief wash over them. The courtroom, moments before tense with anticipation, now buzzed with a low hum of surprised murmurs. Eleanor Harrison, her face etched with a mixture of shame and dawning understanding, met Maria's gaze. A single tear traced a slow path down her cheek, a silent apology. Outside, the sun warmed their faces as they stepped into the bright afternoon. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and blooming jasmine, felt intoxicating after the stale air of the courtroom. Miguel, overwhelmed by the weight of his newfound reality, squeezed Maria's hand tighter. "Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "it's real." Maria smiled, a bittersweet expression softening her usually stern features. "It is, mi hijo. It's real." She brushed a stray strand of hair from his face, her touch gentle, her eyes filled with a love that transcended words. The weight of years of worry, of silent sacrifices, seemed to lift, leaving behind a fragile lightness. The car ride home was silent, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of their shared emotions. Miguel stared out the window, the city blurring into an indistinguishable tapestry of color and light. The vastness of his inheritance, the sudden shift in his life, felt overwhelming. He glanced at Maria, her profile etched in the soft glow of the setting sun. He saw the etched lines of hardship, the unspoken stories behind her quiet strength. And in that moment, the weight of his legacy felt less about the fortune and more about the woman who had given him everything. That evening, over a simple meal of rice and beans, a stark contrast to the lavish meals he now had access to, Miguel spoke. "Mama," he began, his voice quiet yet firm, "I want to use the money to help others, to help people like us." Maria's eyes welled up. This was the boy she had raised. Kind, compassionate, selfless. He wasn't just her son. He was her legacy, a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. This was not just a win in court, it was a victory of the human spirit. The quiet understanding between them sealed a bond that money couldn't buy, a bond stronger than any court ruling. Their journey had just begun. The following weeks were a blur of hushed phone calls, legal consultations, and tentative smiles exchanged across the family's fractured table. Eleanor, surprisingly, took the lead in initiating contact. Her apologies, though hesitant at first, were heartfelt. The scent of lavender from her newly purchased perfume, a stark contrast to her usual sharp, overpowering scents, hung in the air during their first meeting. "Miguel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I am so sorry for how we behaved. We were blinded by greed." Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now filled with a surprising vulnerability. Miguel, seated beside Maria, simply nodded. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. The aroma of Maria's comforting chamomile tea, a constant presence in their small apartment, felt like a protective blanket against the unsettling reality of the Harrison family's wealth. One evening, amidst the lingering scent of roasted chicken, a new fragrance of cautious hope filled the Harrison family's sprawling dining room. Richard, Eleanor's brother, who had been the most vocal in his opposition, cleared his throat. "Maria," he began, his voice rough, "I never knew." He trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of his regret. Maria, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "It's all right, Richard," she said quietly. The quiet strength in her voice, the acceptance in her eyes, surprised them all. The clinking of silverware against china seemed to amplify the quiet acknowledgement of a past mistake. A slow, tentative understanding began to bloom, nurtured by small acts of kindness, shared meals, and quiet conversations. The old resentments hadn't vanished completely. They were scars etched deep, but a fragile hope, like a delicate sapling pushing through hardened soil, began to take root. The weight of the past was slowly beginning to lift, replaced by a burgeoning awareness of a new family, one forged in the fires of adversity and bound together by an unexpected love. The air, once thick with animosity, now carried the faint, hopeful scent of reconciliation. The sun streamed through the tall windows of Miguel's new study, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the golden light. He sat at a massive mahogany desk, the weight of his inheritance pressing down not as a burden, but as a responsibility. He'd spent the last few weeks meticulously reviewing Arthur's business dealings, his sharp mind absorbing complex financial statements with surprising ease. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air, a stark contrast to the chamomile tea Maria always brewed. He picked up a photograph, its edges softened with age. It showed a younger Arthur, his face etched with a fierce tenderness as he held a baby Miguel. A wave of emotion washed over him, a bittersweet ache of longing for a father he never knew, a gratitude for the mother who had sacrificed everything. He traced the lines of Arthur's face, his heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. Later that evening, the aroma of roasting lamb filled the grand Harrison mansion. A scent that once felt alien now felt strangely comforting. The family, once a picture of fractured discord, now gathered around a long, polished table. Eleanor, her usual sharpness tempered by a newfound humility, smiled at Miguel across the table. "This roast lamb," she said, her voice softer than he remembered, "was one of Arthur's favorites." A silence settled, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Richard, his face still bearing the lines of past anger, looked at Miguel, a hesitant smile playing on his lips. "Miguel," he began, his voice low, "about the foundation you're establishing." Miguel nodded, a warm feeling spreading through him. "I want to create something that honors his legacy, but in a way that addresses the inequalities he perhaps unknowingly perpetuated." He met Richard's gaze, his eyes reflecting the quiet understanding growing between them. The weight of the past still lingered, a shadow in the corners of the room, but the warmth of a new family, forged in the fires of adversity, illuminated their faces. The clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversation, the comforting glow of candlelight, all contributed to a sense of peace, of healing. The scent of forgiveness hung in the air, as potent and comforting as Maria's chamomile tea. A new beginning was unfolding, fragile yet strong, and the lingering aroma of roasted lamb seemed to seal this new reality. The following morning, a crisp autumn air filled the sprawling Harrison estate. Sunlight glinted off the dew-kissed lawns, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged within these walls just weeks ago. Miguel, dressed in a simple but well-tailored suit, stood on the terrace, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. The vast gardens, once symbols of opulence and division, now felt peaceful. He watched Eleanor approach, her steps hesitant but determined. The sharp angles of her face, previously etched with bitterness, were softened. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Miguel," she began, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I wanted to apologize." Miguel turned, a small, almost shy smile playing on his lips. "For what, Eleanor?" "For everything," she said, her gaze dropping to the manicured lawn. "For our judgment, our greed, our blindness." She paused, her throat catching slightly. "Arthur, he wasn't always easy, but..." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken regrets hanging heavy in the air. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby oak tree, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Miguel understood. He understood the tangled threads of resentment and regret that bound this family, the painful legacy of Arthur's harsh choices. "He loved you," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of newfound knowledge, of a father he'd never known but somehow felt deeply connected to. Eleanor's eyes, brimming with unshed tears, met his. "He loved us all in his own way," she whispered, a fragile acceptance settling over her face. "We just didn't see it." The silence that followed was not awkward, but charged with unspoken emotions, a shared understanding of the difficult journey they'd all embarked on. The sun warmed Miguel's face as a new sense of belonging settled over him, a quiet promise of healing amidst the grandeur of the Harrison estate. This was not just a house. It was becoming a home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as Miguel oversaw the construction of the new community center. The air hummed with the rhythmic clang of hammers and the cheerful chatter of workers. This wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to his grandfather's and his own complicated legacy. He felt a pang of bittersweet satisfaction, a tangible connection to Arthur, a man he'd never known but whose actions had irrevocably shaped his life. Later, sitting on the patio, a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand, he watched Eleanor approach. The hesitant steps were gone, replaced by a confident stride. The transformation was remarkable. Her eyes, once sharp with resentment, now held a gentle warmth. "It's impressive, Miguel," she said, her voice soft, a far cry from the icy tones he remembered. "This community center, it's just the beginning," he replied, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "There's so much more we can do." I never thought I'd say this," Eleanor continued, her gaze dropping to the shimmering teal of the pool. "But I'm proud of you." A quiet sob escaped, quickly stifled. The raw emotion was unexpected, touching. Miguel rose and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We've all come a long way, Eleanor. We've learned a lot about forgiveness, about family." He paused, looking out at the sprawling estate, now bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. About second chances. The weight of his grandfather's choices, the years of estrangement, the bitterness and the pain, it was all there, subtly interwoven in the quiet understanding that passed between them. It wasn't erased, but it was beginning to heal, to transform into something stronger, more profound. A new family was emerging from the ashes of the old, a family forged in the crucible of loss and rediscovery. The future, once uncertain and shadowed by the past, now shimmered with the promise of a brighter dawn. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the earthy aroma of blooming jasmine as Miguel toured the newly established children's wing of the community center. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the brightly painted walls adorned with playful murals. He watched a group of children, their laughter echoing through the spacious room, engrossed in a painting activity. A profound sense of satisfaction, a warmth spreading from his chest, filled him. This was more than just fulfilling a promise. It was healing a rift, bridging a chasm carved by years of bitterness and misunderstanding. Later that evening, Maria sat on the patio, the twilight painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The gentle lapping of the pool water was a soothing counterpoint to the quiet hum of crickets. A soft breeze carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. She held a framed photograph, a faded image of a younger her, eyes brimming with youthful hope, standing beside a much younger Arthur. A bittersweet smile touched her lips. "He would have been proud, Miguel," she whispered, more to herself than the empty chair beside her. Miguel joined her, settling into the chair. "I know, Mama. He may not have shown it, but I feel it. He wanted this. For us. For all of us." He reached out, his hand covering hers. The rough calluses on his palm contrasted with the soft skin of her hand, a subtle reminder of their different lives. Yet the strength of their bond was undeniable. Maria squeezed his hand gently. "The Harrisons. They're different now." Her voice was filled with a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. They actually attended the center's opening. Eleanor even helped serve refreshments. Miguel nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. They're seeing things differently now. They're starting to understand what family truly means, beyond the wealth and status. The weight of his grandfather's legacy, once a heavy burden, now felt lighter, transformed by acts of kindness and understanding. The future, once a blurred canvas, now held the promise of a vibrant, meaningful life, shared with a family forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by forgiveness. The mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of the Harrison family's dining room, a stark contrast to the muted grief etched on their faces. Eleanor, Arthur's eldest granddaughter, nervously fiddled with a silver napkin ring. "It's different," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper above the clinking of silverware. Seeing Miguel there, surrounded by those children, it was unexpected. A slow smile touched Richard's lips, a smile that held a surprising amount of warmth. "Unexpected, yes, but good. He's doing good things, Eleanor. Good things Arthur would have been proud of." His words were laced with a regret that hung heavy in the air. The silence that followed was filled only with the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, a rhythmic pulse against the backdrop of their evolving understanding. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, painting the scene in shades of gold and amber. The air, thick with the scent of roses from the garden, felt strangely peaceful. "It's not just the money, is it?" Charles, the youngest son, spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "It's seeing him, seeing how he's using it not for himself but for others. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about. Well, everything." His words resonated deeply with the rest of the family, a quiet acknowledgement of their past mistakes, their misplaced priorities. For the first time in a long time, a sense of shared reflection, rather than bitter contention, settled over the table. The weight of Arthur's legacy, once a source of conflict, was slowly transforming into a catalyst for growth and understanding. The aroma of freshly brewed tea, a familiar comfort, added a note of peaceful contemplation to the scene. Their journey towards acceptance wasn't complete, but the path ahead, once shrouded in darkness, now shimmered with the faint promise of a brighter dawn. The crisp autumn air nipped at exposed skin as Miguel strolled through the sprawling grounds of the orphanage, a place that held a bittersweet resonance now. He'd returned, not as the impoverished boy he once was, but as a changed young man, the weight of his inheritance sitting lightly on his shoulders. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of the Harrison estate. He stopped at the old oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. He remembered climbing it as a child, dreaming of a life beyond the orphanage walls. Now, those dreams were not only realized but exceeded. He pulled out a worn photograph from his pocket. Maria, her face etched with worry and love, cradling a baby Miguel. The image whispered 1,000 untold stories of sacrifice and unwavering devotion. A wave of emotion washed over him, a complex mixture of gratitude, love, and a profound sense of responsibility. He wasn't just changing his life. He was changing the lives of others, fulfilling a promise whispered on countless sleepless nights. Later, in the warmth of the orphanage's common room, he found Maria. The lines on her face had softened, replaced by a quiet serenity that spoke volumes. The transformation wasn't just external. Her eyes held a spark he hadn't seen before, a spark of hope, of acceptance, of peace. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "They're building a new wing, Miguel," she said, her voice soft. "A bigger playground, a better library. All because of you." Her voice trembled slightly, a mixture of pride and emotion. Miguel sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "It's not just about the buildings, Mama. It's about the lives touched. It's about giving back what was given to me." The afternoon sun streamed through the window, painting the room in warm hues, reflecting the warmth in their hearts. The past, though painful, had been acknowledged and, in a way, reconciled. Their future, once uncertain and shrouded in shadows, was now bathed in the golden light of hope. The quiet hum of contentment settled over them, a shared peace hard-earned and richly deserved. The transformation wasn't just theirs. It resonated throughout the lives they touched, a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness, love, and the unexpected blessings that life could bestow. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, reflecting the strained faces gathered around it. The Harrison family, once a picture of icy disdain, now displayed a hesitant mixture of guilt and curiosity. Eleanor, Arthur's eldest daughter, her face etched with regret, finally spoke, her voice a low tremor. "Miguel," she began, her gaze settling on the young man across the table. "Your grandfather, he wasn't always." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "He made mistakes," offered her brother, Charles, his usual arrogance softened by a newfound humility. The air, thick with unspoken apologies, hung heavy with the weight of years of fractured relationships. Miguel, though outwardly calm, felt the tremors of emotion beneath the surface. He saw not just the words, but the genuine remorse in their eyes, a stark contrast to the callous indifference he'd witnessed initially. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, his own emotions a careful tapestry woven from empathy and a cautious hope. The crisp scent of the late autumn evening drifted in from the open windows, a gentle counterpoint to the emotional intensity of the room. Maria, seated beside him, squeezed his hand, her silent reassurance a balm to his nerves. The weight of the past, though still heavy, felt slightly lighter under this unexpected display of familial grace. The clinking of silverware against china was a gentle soundtrack to this fragile, tentative peace, the silence punctuated only by the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. The transformation was gradual, a slow thawing of frozen hearts, but its promise glowed brightly within the gathering shadows. The scent of wood smoke and roasting chestnuts drifted from the open kitchen window, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Harrison dining room. Charles, usually impeccably groomed, ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his usual arrogance replaced by a weary exhaustion. I never knew," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the ornate silverware. Eleanor, her eyes red-rimmed, nodded slowly. "Father, he was capable of great cruelty, but also, I think he loved Elena." Miguel, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, watched them. The weight of his inheritance felt less like a burden and more like a responsibility, a legacy he felt compelled to honor. The initial shock had given way to a quiet resolve, a determination to use his newfound wealth to make a positive impact. He noticed the subtle shift in Maria's posture. Her shoulders, usually slightly hunched, were straighter, a quiet confidence settling over her. "He was a complicated man," Maria said, her voice soft yet firm, a newfound strength radiating from her. The flickering candlelight danced in her dark eyes, illuminating a depth of understanding that surprised even herself. But his love for me, for Miguel, it was always there, even if it was hidden. A comfortable silence settled over the room, broken only by the crackling fireplace. Outside, the wind howled a mournful tune, Yet within the walls of the Harrison mansion, a different kind of harmony began to emerge. The grudging respect that had begun to bloom between Miguel and the Harrison siblings was palpable, a fragile bridge built across a chasm of years of misunderstanding and resentment. It was a beginning, not an ending, the start of a long and arduous journey toward reconciliation, a journey that promised more than just forgiveness, but the possibility of a new, unexpected family. The future remained unwritten, but the first hesitant steps towards it were being taken, one quiet conversation at a time. The lingering scent of roasted chestnuts seemed to whisper of warmth and the promise of a brighter dawn. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows of the conservatory, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Charles, surprisingly, offered Miguel a shy smile. "The orchids," he began, his voice rough. "They were Father's favorite. He spent hours tending to them." Eleanor approached, a hesitant smile mirroring her brother's. She touched a delicate bloom, its petals a vibrant, almost unnatural purple. "He was stubborn," she admitted, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But he had a certain dedication." Miguel, watching them, felt a strange kinship bloom. The anger, the bitterness, seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet understanding. He saw not monsters, but wounded people, grappling with a legacy of pain. "He loved them," Miguel said softly, his gaze drifting to Maria, who stood quietly by the fountain. The gentle splash of water a counterpoint to the quiet reconciliation unfolding before her. Maria smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Years of silent suffering seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. The weight of secrecy, the burden of her hidden past, finally lessened. She saw in the Harrison siblings not just antagonists, but victims, bound by the same man's complex and flawed legacy. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Miguel sat with Maria on the terrace. The air carried the scent of jasmine and night-blooming lilies, a sweet perfume mirroring the burgeoning hope in their hearts. "It's strange," Miguel said, his voice barely a whisper. "This feeling of belonging." Maria reached out, her hand covering his. "We belong to each other, Miguel. Always have." The words held the weight of decades, a lifetime of shared secrets and unspoken love, now finally spoken aloud. The silence between them was filled with unspoken gratitude, a profound understanding that transcended words. The stars, a million tiny pinpricks of light, seemed to witness their fragile reconciliation, a testament to the enduring power of family, even one forged in the crucible of loss and misunderstanding. The future, once shrouded in uncertainty, now shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Miguel, bundled in a thick wool scarf, stood beside Maria on the sprawling lawn of the Harrison estate. The once hostile mansion now seemed softer, less imposing, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He watched Charles, meticulously pruning a rose bush, his movements deliberate and almost meditative, a stark contrast to the angry, entitled man Miguel had first encountered. "He's different," Miguel observed, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Grief changes people, mi hijo. It can break them or it can reveal something stronger." Eleanor emerged from the house, a tray laden with steaming mugs. She approached them with hesitant steps, her eyes downcast. I made hot chocolate," she offered, her voice shaky. "Your favorite, Miguel, with extra marshmallows." Miguel took the mug, the warmth spreading through his hands. The gesture was simple, yet it held a depth of meaning that resonated far beyond the simple act of kindness. It was an offering of peace, an olive branch extended across a chasm of years of bitterness and misunderstanding. "Thank you, Eleanor," he replied, his voice sincere. "It smells wonderful." Silence settled between them, comfortable and companionable, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. The air thrummed with unspoken apologies and hesitant hopes. The weight of the past still lingered, a shadow that stretched long and dark, but in the golden light of the setting sun, it seemed less oppressive, less insurmountable. It was a fragile piece, easily shattered, but in that moment, it felt precious, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of forgiveness. The beginning, perhaps, of a new chapter, a new family. The following weeks blurred into a tapestry of quiet moments and unexpected connections. Miguel, surprisingly unfazed by his newfound wealth, channeled his energy into establishing a foundation dedicated to underprivileged children, mirroring the struggles of his own childhood. He visited local schools, his presence a quiet force of positive change. The scent of freshly baked bread often wafted from the renovated kitchen of the Harrison estate, Eleanor's attempts at reconciliation manifesting in delicious, albeit slightly burnt, pastries. Charles, initially resistant, began spending hours tending the gardens, his anger slowly giving way to a quiet pride in Miguel's achievements. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender, Maria sat on the veranda, a half-knitted scarf in her lap. The wool, a soft, deep blue, felt warm against her fingers. Miguel joined her, settling beside her with a sigh. The air hummed with the quiet contentment of a day well spent. "Abuela," Miguel began, his voice low, "I saw Eleanor talking to Mr. Harrison today. They seemed different." Maria smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Grief," she murmured, "has a way of stripping away the unnecessary layers. It reveals what truly matters." Miguel nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He reached out, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch resonated through her, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. The rhythmic click of his knitting needles provided a soothing soundtrack to their unspoken conversation. The soft glow of twilight enveloped them, washing away the bitterness of the past. The weight of Arthur's legacy remained, a poignant reminder of the difficult path they had traversed. But now, it felt lighter, less oppressive. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees surrounding the estate, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The sounds of nature filled the air, a chorus of crickets, the hoot of an owl, the distant barking of a dog, creating a peaceful, serene atmosphere that soothed their souls. It was the quiet balm of a new beginning, a promise of healing and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The family wasn't perfect, not yet, but they were together, and that, in itself, was a miracle. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Harrison Estate's conservatory, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Eleanor, surprisingly, hummed a cheerful tune while arranging a vase of lilies, their fragrance a stark contrast to the lingering scent of tension that still clung to the air. Charles, his face etched with a softer line than before, meticulously pruned a rosebush, his movements deliberate and calming. "He's different now," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the delicate petals. "Miguel, he's not spoiled." Charles grunted, a low sound of acknowledgement. He carefully snipped a dead bloom, his gaze falling to the lush green foliage. "He's got a good heart, like his mother." The words were gruff, yet held a hint of something akin to admiration. A week later, a lavish family dinner was held. The formal dining room, usually a stage for icy silences and pointed remarks, buzzed with surprisingly warm conversation. Miguel, seated between Maria and Eleanor, effortlessly navigated the shifting dynamics, his easy laughter a balm to the lingering wounds. Maria's hand rested briefly on his, a silent reassurance. The clinking of silverware, the soft murmur of voices, the aroma of roasted lamb, all formed a comforting backdrop to their tentative steps toward reconciliation. "Miguel," Charles began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "about the foundation. Your work is impressive." A genuine smile graced his lips, a smile devoid of the bitterness that had long been his trademark. Miguel smiled back, a warmth radiating from him. "It's rewarding, seeing the difference it makes." He paused, glancing at Maria, his eyes filled with affection. "Abuela taught me the value of hard work and kindness." It's something that money can't buy. Maria's eyes glistened. She nodded, a silent affirmation of his words, her heart swelling with pride. The lingering shadows of the past still existed, but they were gradually being consumed by the radiant light of forgiveness, a light born of shared sacrifice and a newfound understanding of family's true meaning. The meal ended not with strained goodbyes, but with the soft murmur of shared memories and tentative plans for future gatherings. A fragile but promising beginning for a family reborn. The crisp autumn air, scented with wood smoke and damp earth, carried the faint sound of children's laughter from the nearby park. Inside, the warmth of the Harrison Estates library enveloped Maria and Miguel. Sunlight, filtering through stained glass windows, painted kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn Persian rug. Miguel, surrounded by towering bookshelves filled with forgotten histories, traced a finger along the spine of a leather-bound volume. A quiet contentment settled over him, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the past months. Abuela, Miguel began, his voice low. I still can't believe it. All of it. Maria smiled, a soft, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She reached out, her hand covering his. Life has a funny way of surprising us, Mijo. But remember, she squeezed his hand gently. We faced everything together. We always will. A tremor ran through Miguel's hand, a silent testament to the lingering unease. The weight of his inheritance, the scrutiny of the public eye, the subtle shifts in the Harrison family's demeanor, it all pressed upon him. Yet, in Maria's unwavering gaze, he found solace. He looked up at the portraits lining the wall, the stern faces of generations past softened somehow by the light. He felt a wave of sympathy, understanding the deep-seated hurts that had shaped this family. I wonder what Abuelo would think, Miguel murmured, his voice barely audible above the crackling fireplace. Maria sighed, a long, drawn-out breath that spoke volumes of unspoken grief and bittersweet acceptance. He made his choices, Mijo, but he loved you in his own way. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a testament to a love enduring despite years of separation and silence. And he loved me, she added softly, even if he didn't know it. The silence that followed was not awkward, but filled with a shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the complex tapestry of their past. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, a gentle whisper against the backdrop of their unspoken words, a promise of a new beginning. The future remained uncertain, but in that shared moment of quiet reflection, both Miguel and Maria found peace, a sense of belonging, a future forged in the crucible of the past, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of family. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of legal paperwork, therapy sessions, and carefully orchestrated public appearances. Miguel, surprisingly adept at navigating the media whirlwind, used his newfound platform to champion causes close to his heart, supporting underprivileged children and funding community initiatives. He found solace in the tangible results, a stark contrast to the gilded cage of the Harrison estate. One evening, while strolling through the manicured gardens, he encountered Eleanor Harrison, Arthur's eldest granddaughter. The initial frostiness had thawed, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. Eleanor, once consumed by resentment, now seemed genuinely interested in Miguel, her voice soft as she said, "It's strange, isn't it? Everything that's happened." Miguel nodded, the scent of roses and damp earth filling his lungs. Strange, but good, in a way. Eleanor smiled, a fragile thing but genuine. "I never knew my grandfather," she confessed, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon. "Not really. Now, I feel like I'm getting to know him. Through you." The unspoken acknowledgement of shared lineage hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years. The garden, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, a sense of true connection replaced the bitterness of the past. A seed of healing carefully planted. The sprawling Harrison estate, once a symbol of cold indifference, began to hum with a different energy. Sunlight streamed through the newly opened windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent testament to the upheaval. Inside, Eleanor, her face still bearing the faint lines of worry, sat with Miguel at the grand piano, the polished ebony gleaming under the light. He played a simple melody, his fingers hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. The music, soft and melancholic, filled the space. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The tension that had once clung to her like a shroud was visibly easing. Miguel smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "My mother taught me," he said softly, the words carrying the weight of shared history, of a past both tragic and triumphant. "She always said music could heal." He paused, the silence punctuated only by the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. She's finally starting to believe it too," he added, his gaze drifting to the window, where Maria was tending the roses, her back straight, her movements deliberate. The years of quiet suffering seemed to have melted away, replaced by a gentle strength. Eleanor nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "We all are," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Learning to believe in healing, in second chances, in family." A comfortable silence settled between them, a silence born not of awkwardness, but of shared understanding. The weight of the past, though still present, no longer felt crushing, felt manageable. The scent of roses, mingled with the polished wood and old books, created a comforting aroma, a fragrant backdrop to the quiet hope that blossomed within the walls of the once impregnable Harrison estate. The melody shifted, becoming brighter, more hopeful, reflecting the subtle yet profound changes sweeping through their lives. A new beginning, uncertain yet promising, had truly begun. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender. Inside, the Harrison family gathered for their first truly shared meal since the revelations. The air, thick with unspoken emotions, still held the faint scent of lilies, Eleanor's favorite, a deliberate choice to soften the harsh edges of the dining room. This is unexpected," Charles, Arthur's eldest son, mumbled, his gaze flitting between Miguel and Maria. His stiffness betrayed years of ingrained prejudice, yet a tentative softening was visible in his eyes. Eleanor, her hand resting gently on Miguel's, smiled faintly. "Unexpected, perhaps," she conceded, her voice husky with emotion, "but not unwelcome." She looked at Maria, her expression genuine. "Maria, thank you for everything." Maria's eyes welled. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "It wasn't easy," she finally managed, her voice a quiet tremor. "But Miguel, he's my everything." She reached across the table, her hand covering Eleanor's. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. Forgiveness offered, acceptance received. Miguel, observing the quiet exchange between his mother and his newfound relatives, felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The weight of Arthur's legacy, once a crushing burden, now felt lighter, almost manageable. He looked at the ornate silver cutlery, a stark contrast to the simple wooden spoons of his childhood, and a smile played on his lips. He had earned this, not just the wealth, but the acceptance, the love, the family he had never known. He looked at his mother. Their eyes met across the table, a silent language of years of shared hardship and unwavering love passing between them. The past was not erased, but it no longer defined them. A new chapter, full of both challenges and possibilities, was dawning. The warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth mirrored the warmth blossoming in their hearts, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of forgiveness. The future remained uncertain, yet in this shared moment, under the soft glow of the setting sun, they found a fragile, yet undeniable hope.